Charlie on a tragic and fateful day. He put 10 cents in his pocket.
Welcome to a new episode of Folk Files, the podcast where we dissect, investigate, and uncover fun tidbits about traditional folk songs. The central song for this episode is The MTA, or the MTA Song, and its tune has jumped genres over the past 2 centuries. Yes, it has been a folk song, as you can hear from the version by the band Barleycorn playing in the background, but the tune has also been used for a country song and originated as a pop song. I got the idea for this episode from my bandmate, Arnie Parrott, who pointed out that the MTA Song, which is about Boston's subway system, was actually based on an older song about a train that never returned, which in turn was based on a song about a ship that never returned. I expected the history of the tune to simply be a fun jaunt through different transportation technologies, but my research took me in a lot of unexpected directions. I learned about the intricacies of the Red Scare in Boston, the successful 19th century pop music industry that was destroyed by the Great Chicago Fire, and ways in which folk music experts have helped decide court cases. I think the best way to talk about this tune is to work backwards, starting with the MTA Song itself. In 1996, the National Review, a conservative magazine, named the MTA Song as one of the top 100 most conservative rock songs. At first listen, you might be able to understand why they included it in that list. The song tells the fictional, surreal story of Charlie, who was riding the subway in Boston when he was forced to pay an exit fare of 5 cents. He didn't have 5 cents, so he couldn't get off the train and was forced to ride the subway forever. If you ever rode on what is now known as the MBTA, or the T, you might have purchased a Charlie card, which was named after this song. The MTA Song is a protest against exit fares and subway fare hikes in general. Not wanting to pay extra money for a public service is technically conservative, but this particular situation is far more complicated than that. Let's take another step back in time. How did the MTA Song become popular enough for the transit card to be named after its main character? We have the Kingston Trio to thank for that. They were a group that took advantage of the popularity of calypso music and Hawaiian folk in the 1950s. This was around the same time that Harry Belafonte became popular. They recorded the MTA Song in 1959, and it became a hit. Here's their version featuring one of the most memorable verses of the song.
Charlie's wife goes down to the Scully Square station every day at 2:15, and through the open window she hands Charlie a sandwich as the train comes rumbling through. But did he ever return? No, he never returned, and his fate is still unlearned. He may ride forever neath the streets of Boston. He's the man who never returned. Pick it, Davey.
Regarding this verse, many people, including some Folk Files listeners, have pointed out that there's something fishy going on with the narrative. If Charlie's wife was able to pass him a sandwich through the subway car window, why couldn't she hand him a nickel? Did she have ulterior motives for wanting him to stay underground forever? In any case, the Kingston Trio did not write the MTA Song. They learned it from a man named Will Holt, who also recorded the song. However, Will Holt's version was yanked off of the air by radio stations, and his career was threatened because he, unlike the Kingston Trio, did not change the original lyrics. You might think, was there a slur or some sort of expletive? No. Will Holt's version was banned from the radio because it mentioned the name Walter O'Brien. The line where the Kingston Trio name an imaginary political candidate, vote for George O'Brien, get poor Charlie off the MTA, was originally vote for Walter O'Brien because the song was written for a real political campaign. But Walter O'Brien was not conservative as the National Review might have thought. He was progressive. So progressive that he was labeled a communist during the Red Scare. Will Holt's version of the MTA Song was banned because angry listeners wrote in claiming that the song glorified a communist. Let's take another step back to Boston in the 1940s. Walter O'Brien, a charismatic former Union leader, ran for mayor in 1949 on the Progressive Party ticket. This was a ballsy move because in 1948, Progressive candidate Henry Wallace's campaign for President of the United States failed, causing many Progressive Party chapters to close. Boston's Progressive Party chapter survived in part because of Walter O'Brien, who was an enigmatic and inspiring person, but who most importantly wanted to make everyone feel like an equal, indispensable part of the team. O'Brien's bid for mayor failed, and this emphasis on being a team player may have been part of the reason why. O'Brien's campaign was centered on teaching people how to protest against unfair government practices. He focused on educating people, not telling them to vote for him. He didn't necessarily want to be lifted above everyone else. He wanted to lift everyone up around him. And, on a more depressing note, his run for mayor failed because in the late 40s, the U.S. populace was being brainwashed to believe that a lot of progressive policies were communist and therefore bad. Supporting unions, racial equality, and better housing were all causes that reeked of the evil of communism, and, of course, these were all things that O'Brien fought for. As a reminder, the Red Scare never truly ended. You still cannot immigrate to the United States if you identify as a communist. The biggest issue that O'Brien ran on, and the one that birthed the MTA Song, was subway fare increases. Boston was the first city in the nation to have a subway system, and when it first started out, it was a wild west of private transportation companies. Eventually, one private transportation company, the Boston Elevated Railway Company, bought out all the rest. But when it faced bankruptcy in 1947, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, MTA, was created to take over the subway. The MTA absorbed the Boston Elevated Railway Company and raised prices by about 50% to bail out the private company. So O'Brien wasn't concerned that a public transit authority was raising prices to pay for public works. He was bothered that the everyman was being squeezed to pay a private company's debts. O'Brien had a very low-budget campaign, but he did take a page out of Henry Wallace's book by hiring folk singers to write music for him.
From all of you good workers, good news to you I'll tell, of how the good old Union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
That was the Almanac Singers, a group that contained a lot of the members that would contribute to People's Songs, a musical organization that helped get Henry Wallace on the presidential ballot. One of the members, along with Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, was Bess Lomax Hawes. Bess was the sister of Alan Lomax, the famous song collector, and a very quick lyricist. Not only did she seem to know more folk songs than anyone else, she also was able to compose new words to promote various causes on the spot. So when O'Brien started putting out feelers, hoping to get a few songs for his campaign, Hawes was the perfect person for the job. She wrote the MTA Song with Jacqueline Steiner. They had already used the tune for an earlier song called The Train That Never Returned, which was a song about breaking union lines. It was never recorded, but to give you an idea, the first verse went, "I'll tell you the story of some politicians who rode on a yellow scab train. On a Monday morning they left the station and they never were seen again." Hawes and Steiner used the same tune for the MTA Song, but this time they recorded the song. Sadly, I couldn't find the original 1949 recording, and I wonder if it still exists. If anyone has any information on this, please let me know. O'Brien broadcast the song from a campaign truck that drove around the streets of Boston. He was fined $10 for noise pollution. Even though O'Brien only got 1.2% of the mayoral vote, he did get 20,000 signatures on his petition to reverse the subway fare hike in only a couple months, so the song seemed to have some sort of positive effect. Just 6 years after his failed mayoral run, O'Brien became a victim of McCarthyism. He was included on a list of 85 people listed as communists or communist adjacent, again because he fought for union rights, civil rights, and affordable housing. It made it impossible for him to hold a job. Every time he got a new job, The FBI would show up to his place of work and speak to his employer, which would lead to his termination. He had to move his wife and children up to Maine and keep his head low and start a new life. Researching the Red Scare, it's crazy to think that the U.S. managed to convince so much of the population that this specific group of people, communists, were dangerous when most of them were completely innocent or only guilty of small things like noise pollution. It's crazy to think that so many people didn't question the government's claims against this group and didn't bat an eye when a government department was essentially weaponized and given free rein to victimize those people, terrorize their loved ones, to use their children to capture parents, and to make people fear that their family might be rounded up next.
It's all just a little bit of history repeating.
Anyways, there is a somewhat sweet addition to O'Brien's story. He was over the moon when he heard the Kingston Trio's The MTA played on the radio in 1959. He didn't seem bothered that they changed his name, which kind of gives me Mike Wazowski vibes. He excitedly called up one of the musicians who recorded the song and exclaimed, "We're famous!" Again, showing that for him, it was always about a victory for the team, not the individual. But now let's go back in time even further. If you're a country music fan, then you might know that the tune of the MTA, or The Train That Never Returned, had been used for a different song about a train. As a reminder, here's a verse from The MTA, sung by Tracy Newman.
Charlie handed in his dime at the Kendall Square station, and he paid for Jamaica Plain. When he got there, the conductor told him one more nickel. Charlie couldn't get off of that train.
And here is The Wreck of the Old 97, performed by Johnny Cash.
Well, they give him his orders at Monroe, Virginia, saying, "Steve, you're way behind time. This is not 38, this is old 97. You must put her in the Spencer on time."
It's the same tune. The Wreck of the Old 97 doesn't have a chorus, so you never hear the "Did he ever return?" section, but the verses are essentially identical. The Wreck of the Old 97 tells the story of a real train disaster that happened in Virginia in 1903. The Old 97 was a term of endearment for a fast mail train that had actually only been in service for about 10 months. The contract that the Old 97 had with the federal government stated that the train company would be fined $200 for every hour the train was delayed. That translates to about $5,000 today. On the day of the accident, the train was running late, and so to avoid the fine, Steve Brody, the engineer, started gunning the engine, possibly going up to 80 miles per hour. Probably not 90 miles per hour like the song says. At a certain point near Danville, Virginia, Brody discovered that the train no longer had any air brakes, probably because he had been messing with them in order to travel faster around the curves. He tried to slow the train by putting it in reverse using the Johnson bar. Unfortunately, this caused the train to jump the tracks and plummet into the ravine. 11 people died. The song gives Brody a dramatic death, as you can hear in this version by Hank Snow.
He was going down grade, making 90 miles an hour when his whistle broke into a scream. He was found in the wreck with his hand on the throttle and scalded to death by the steam.
In reality, Brody was thrown from the train, so he wasn't found with his hand on the throttle, but he probably was scalded to death by the steam. We now know who wrote The Wreck of the Old 97, though, as we'll discover, it was a mystery for a while. Charles Weston Knoll and Frederick Jackson Louis, two workers at a cotton mill near the site of the tragedy, composed the ballad. Proof of authorship is the publication of Knoll's lyrics in the Mill News in Charlotte, North Carolina, shortly after the accident. Henry Witter, however, was the first to record the song in 1924, and by that point, the original authorship had been obscured. Witter heard the song from a fiddler in Virginia and then made the trip to New York to record the song. Vernon Delhart, an established singer at the time, recorded his own version of the song after hearing Henry Witter's, and that was the recording that became an enormous success. Delhart's version sold 25 million copies and has been called the first million-selling hit in country music. However, Delhart had a lot of trouble understanding Witter's accent, and so some of the lyrics got changed between the two versions. For example, Steve, the engineer, became Pete in Delhart's version. Air brakes became average, and put her in Spencer became put her in center. Here's a little bit of Witter's version so you can understand why Delhart may have had some trouble.
They give him his orders at Monroe, Virginia, saying, Steve, you're away by time. This is not 38, but it's 097. You must put her in Spencer on time.
One specific line, which Delhart copied correctly from Witter, indicates that neither man was from the area of the crash. Lima's on a 3-mile grade, a phrase that referred to a location in Virginia just north of Danville, became a line on a 3-mile grade. You can hear it here in Delhart's recording.
It's a mighty rough road from Lynchburg to Danville, and a line on a 3-mile grade. It was on that grade that he lost his average, and you see what a jump he made.
As the song became more and more popular, people wanted to know who had written it. While Witter held the copyright, he was very upfront about the fact that he did not write the song. Therefore, the Victor Gramophone Company issued a statement saying that they'd be interested in finding the original writer so that they could distribute royalties. That was a questionable move, because they were essentially opening the door to any Virginian to show up and claim the money. And that's what happened. David Graves George, a mountaineer from Virginia, showed up with what he claimed to be the original version of The Wreck of the Old 97, and a statement saying, I, with others, composed the poetry of 97. Or, sorry, that's what the letter originally said on March 7th, 1927. It was later changed after he sued the Victor Gramophone Company to, I alone composed the poetry of 97. Red flag number 1. There was a long legal battle between the Mountaineer and the Victor Gramophone Company, during which they had to call upon folk music experts and handwriting experts. The handwriting expert that the Victor Company used was also an analytical chemist who discovered that the lyric sheet that George claimed to be the original song was written with a pencil that did not exist in 1903, the year in which George said he wrote the song. In terms of folk music scholarship, George made a lot of the same errors that Delhart had made, changing Steve to Pete and Spencer to center, for example, suggesting that he had learned the song from Delhart rather than the other way around. He did, however, correct some of Delhart's errors, such as restoring line Anna to Lima, which was probably due to his being a local Virginian. While an initial trial ruled in favor of George, the ruling was appealed and all other court decisions ruled in favor of the Victor Company. Note, however, that George never claimed to have composed the melody. He laid claim to the poetry. That's because the tune for The Wreck of the Old 97 already existed before the song's composition, and its origin is one that record companies tried to shove under the rug. Why? Because country music was being touted as traditional, southern, and primitive. It was marketed as belonging to the hill people of Appalachia, untouched by the commercial music industry and transmitted orally. Music scholars tried to push this narrative on the tune of The Wreck of the Old 97, saying things like, so-and-so heard it as a boy on Pine Mountain, or calling it a Kentucky Mountain version of a popular song. But in reality, the tune for the most popular country song of the time was composed by a pop music writer from Connecticut who believed strongly in emancipation and wrote anti-Confederacy songs.
There were sweet farewells, there were loving signals, while a form was yet discerned. So they knew it not was a song, parting for the ship, she never returned. Did she ever return? She never returned. Her fate is yet unlearned. So for years and years there were fond ones watching for the ship that never returned.
That is The Ship That Never Returned by Henry Clay Work, the composer in question. It's a 1932 performance by Asa Martin and James Roberts. As you can hear, this is the direct ancestor of the MTA Song, with the chorus still intact. Work wrote the song in 1865, right in the middle of his prolific career. The song is a little cryptic. We never find out why the ship never returned, but at that time it was unfortunately common for ocean voyages to go poorly. I call Work a pop music writer, and that may seem like an odd term to use for a 19th century composer. But what I mean is that he sold the sheet music for his songs to people who would then perform that music publicly. This was an extension of the classic broadside tradition. The sheet music often had parts, so groups could sing the songs in churches or civic spaces. Work's music was commercial and literate, everything that early 20th century country music was not supposed to be. Work's publishers, Root and Katie, were based in Chicago, where there was a substantial popular music culture. We usually only hear about Tin Pan Alley in New York, but Chicago was a big music publishing center until shortly after the fire. The Great Chicago Fire destroyed the music and musical instruments of many performers and decimated the publishing industry. Root and Katie lost $250,000 in the fire. But by that time, Work's work was already very well known. You may have heard one of his best-known songs, Grandfather's Clock, here performed by the Edison Quartet in 1905.
90 years without slumbering, his life's reckless numbering. It sucks, never to go again, when the old man dies.
A singer friend of mine by the name of Stephen Levine recently pointed out that the song is a little creepy, and now I can't unhear it. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Work also wrote songs that carried a pro-abolitionist message, but he often refrained from being too on the nose. After all, his father had been imprisoned for his radically abolitionist views and for freeing fugitive slaves when Work was a boy, so Work had witnessed what happened to people who were too outspoken. His song, Poor Kitty Popcorn, in which a black cat dies in the snow, is a weirdly jaunty tune thought to be an allegory for recently freed black men and women coming to the North only to be shunned by Northerners. Here's a little bit of that, sung by Joan Morris and the Camerata Chorus of Washington.
The war is over and the troops disband me. Kitty follows as a pilgrim to the northern land. But sorrow overtakes her and her master dies, while she sadly sits a-gazing in his dim blue eyes. To by strangers driven rudely from the door she cries.
Perhaps his most outspoken song, however, is Who Shall Rule This American Nation, in which he basically lays blame on Southerners, saying, Who shall rule this American nation? Shall the man who trampled on the banner? They who now their country would betray? They who murder the innocent freedmen? Say, boys, say.
Who shall rule this American nation? Say, boys, say. Who shall sit in the loftiest station? Say, boys, say. Shall the men who trampled on the banner, they who now the country would betray, they who murder the innocent freedmen? Say, boys, say.
No, never, the loyal millions say, and it's they who rule this American nation, they, boys, they.
That was the Chestnut Brass Company and Friends. I find it funny that Alan Lomax once claimed that New England developed no distinctive musical style of its own, and yet a New Englander wrote a tune that would be used for what Richard Carlin called country's first certified big hit. A tune that would become so ubiquitous and easily parodied that Alan Lomax's own sister would use it for a song that then, in the 1950s, would hang out at number 15 on the music charts. The Wreck of the Old 97 and The MTA are not the only two songs to use Work's tune, and I shall cover a few more of them in this month's Patreon blog post. You can find my Patreon in the episode notes, or just go to patreon.com/folkfilespodcast. You may have noticed that I haven't done my new feature where I highlight beloved folk institutions around the country. And that's because no one elected their local folk community. So hopefully this will serve as a reminder. Reach out to me at folkfilespodcast@gmail.com with information about a folk music club, group, session, blog, radio station, or otherwise that you'd like to celebrate. We'll end with another version of The Ship That Never Returned, the song that started it all, that is surprisingly tender and virtuosic. It is performed by countertenor Reginald Mobley, viola da gamba player Doug Balliet, and Brandon Acker on a 19th century guitar. I'll leave you with this little reminder. If you're trapped in the subway system, let your partner know that money is probably more useful than sandwiches. Thank you for listening.
On a summer's day when the wave was rippled by the softest, gentlest breeze, did a ship set sail with a cargo laden for a port beyond the seas. There were sweet farewells, there were loving signals, while a form was yet discerned. Though they knew it not, 'twas a solemn parting, for the ship she never returned. Did she never return? She never returned. Her fate, it is yet unknown. Though for years and years there were fond ones watching, yet the ship, she never returned.